Leviathan's Womb by Alistair Rey. When we received the call, I was skeptical. John Garvey had just entered the office with 2 steaming cups of coffee cradled in his arms, the crumbs of a morning pastry plastered to his beard. He looked mildly disheveled, as was customary. His plaid shirt and bleach-stained cargo shorts were basically a uniform by this point. John was the type of guy who had never left grad school. Not really. "Did I hear that right?" he asked, squinting into the pale light angling through the blinds. I shrugged, knowing full well he had. Shelley was still on the line, chewing her lip with an irritating smacking noise. A call from the Bay Aquarium was not out of the ordinary. We fielded all kinds of requests throughout the year. Reports of harbor seals tangled in plastic wrap, or beach dolphins in need of assistance. Once we even received a frantic call from a freelance biologist, warning of a potential bacterial infection spreading in the water. It turned out to be a benign algae bloom. Most of these we passed along to the Coast Guard or other local authorities. But the call that morning was different. Shelley, normally talkative and quick with a joke, seemed oddly reserved, like she couldn't believe what she was telling me. "Whale fall," she said in a slow, deliberate voice. "Whale fall?" I repeated back, thinking I'd misheard. "Whale fall," she confirmed in a serious tone that sounded unlike the Shelley I knew. Look at the horizon, and what do you see? An undulating plain of bluish gray deliquescing into sky. The jutting rocks and coastal cliffs that hug the shore do nothing to diminish the sense of infinity. When you confront the water, really confront it, that is, you get an inkling of why the sea has perennially called to poets across the ages. We think we know what the ocean is, but we're wrong. Most of us stare at the planar surface of the water and see an aqueous extension of the land. It's difficult to imagine what it's actually like below that surface. We might watch a nature show and marvel at the countless varieties of life teeming in the water. We might go scuba diving and post pictures of our latest vacation to the Caribbean or the Maldives on Instagram. But that's not the ocean. It's a comfortable and consumable representation of what we think the ocean is, something reproduced on television screens and social media accounts. The real ocean is not exotic. It is unfeeling and predatory, inverting everything we understand as human. Monterey Bay gets its fair share of tourists every year. Most stick to the beaches and coastal trails. The more adventurous will hit the dive sites around San Carlos or board a boat to watch humpback whales churning in the waves. These are people who think they know the ocean. People coming from Seattle or Melbourne who brag about visiting the Great Barrier Reef and swap travel stories at beachside tiki bars. And perhaps they do know the ocean, or at least that agreeable version of it encountered on Blue Planet or in travel brochures. But to really know it, its obscurity and its vastness, is another thing altogether. When I took the position at the Marine Sanctuary, I thought I knew the ocean. I had studied it intensively, writing articles for aquaculture and ecolife. I prided myself on being an expert. I now realize I was just like those other people, going on at length about my experiences and my little forays under the waves, without ever really grasping the immensity of what I was considering. Like them, I was a foreigner in an extraordinary land. It only took those 2 syllables, whale fall, to make this clear. John took a swig from his coffee and shook his head. "Impossible," he muttered. Shelley hesitantly agreed. "I wasn't sure if I should bother calling it in, but..." As she went through the details again, my doubt mounted. The previous afternoon, an amateur scientist aboard a whale-watching expedition had taken a series of pictures with a high-tech sonar refracting imaging camera showing a large inert form on the ocean floor. After enlarging and examining the impressions, the expedition leader reached a tentative conclusion. The shape in the photo appeared to be a whale carcass surrounded by a shoal of cephalopods. The Bay Aquarium seemed the logical first port of call. In scientific terms, a whale fall occurs when the cadaver of a whale sinks to the seabed. Over time, deep-sea organisms gravitate toward the decomposing body, feeding off the remains to sustain themselves in adverse climatic conditions. The high levels of carbon produced by the decaying carcass can support an impressive variety of oceanic flora and fauna, becoming a complex and localized ecosystem distinct from the surrounding environment. Now, if all this sounds technical, it is. The main point, however, isn't too difficult to grasp. The dead whale is a source of nutrition, supplying nourishment to a vast array of life forms. These types of occurrences are well documented by marine biologists. However, they typically occur at extreme oceanic depths, where lower temperatures and increased hydrostatic pressures act to slow tissue decomposition. A whale fall some 3 miles off the coast, let alone one that could be spotted from a tour boat, was virtually unheard of. Impossible, John muttered again, as though reading my thoughts. It's probably some type of marine debris. I imagined Shelley wincing at the other end as John launched into one of his predictable lectures on the disastrous consequences of oceanic pollution, or the fact that by 2050 there would be more plastic than fish in the sea. In John's general worldview, humans could be nothing other than perpetrators. They were designed to extract, exploit, and dominate, and they did it with skill. You expect us to suit up and investigate a few bottles and cans on the ocean floor? Yes, that was exactly what she expected. We were the only ones in the area with the sonar capabilities to investigate. I could tell John was getting worked up. He was rubbing the star-shaped tattoo on his left forearm, a telltale sign that John was entering his element, as he liked to put it. I once asked him what the tattoo meant. It was his North Star, he said, a reminder of his inner guiding light. Too often, though, that inner light exploded into the outer world like a supernova. He welcomed any occasion to inform people about the devastating impact of microplastics on aquatic ecosystems, or point out the hypocrisies of supposedly eco-friendly corporate waste disposal policies. It was textbook John. When he was in the zone, he could be relentless. "Don't shoot the messenger," was all Shelley said when John finished. John grinned, spreading his thumb and index finger to convey a loaded pistol. He pointed it directly at me. "Bang," he whispered, pulling an invisible trigger. John was the type of person who would indeed shoot the messenger and everyone associated with him. "Why did you want to become a marine biologist?" John asked me one evening. We were returning from a conference in San Fran. The team presentation had gone well, and we had decided to celebrate with a few beers before making the trek back to Monterey. I could feel the mellowing effects of the alcohol settling over me, and all I could do was shrug. "I'd never really questioned it," I said. "It was just something I became after pursuing studies in biology as an undergrad." John scowled at this. I could have appeased him, citing a deep commitment to climate activism or animal rights like him. However, it would have been a lie. I was no eco-warrior. In the end, my choice had been practical. This conversation returned to me every time we prepared to head out on the open water. John, with his Greenpeace stickers and his rehearsed declarations in favor of environmental justice. John, with his militant convictions and sense of initiative. By comparison, I came off as bland. I had never been driven by a cause. I had no abstract understanding of a greater good to get me through the days. John chatted with the trawler captain as we navigated away from the marina. In the distance, the jagged cliffs glinted in the sun. Speedboats darted through the water, generating wakes that made the trawler bounce as we passed. A few meters away, I spotted some teenagers clustered in a white sea ray, drinking from cans, their eyes concealed behind identical pairs of wraparound sunglasses. They were cruising at a reckless speed for an area with protected wildlife. "Assholes," John muttered. The bay was dotted with motorized crafts and gliding sails, the numbers unusually high for the season. No doubt word of yesterday's discovery was already circulating through the local communities and drawing the curious. The boats bobbed and emitted exhaust from their outboard motors. They belched rock music from portable speakers and cut through the waves at death-defying angles. John was rubbing his tattoo as he watched the afternoon pleasure boaters, an intense look of hatred in his eyes. You ever think of leaving this behind, of finding something purer? Leave it behind and go where? I asked with a mirthless laugh. John made a face. It seemed to suggest I lacked imagination, that I couldn't envision something better and more perfect. Environments are complex structures built upon change and diversity. There's no such thing as absolute harmony or equilibrium in the natural order, no matter how much we'd like to believe it. Struggle and adaptation are nature's basic laws. This was a hard pill to swallow for idealists like John, who tended to see the world in stark terms of right versus wrong, nature versus man. Eventually, the roar of engines and music diminished until there was just the steady hum of the trawler and the lapping of the waves. Despite the calm, John was still smoldering. "We should have intercepted those punks in the Sea Ray," he said. "They were well over the speed limit." I reminded him we didn't have the authority to intercept a vessel. He brushed my comment aside with a wave of his hand. And what if they had hit an otter? What if they had killed The sonar blipped, cutting him off mid-sentence. We both paused and exchanged confused looks. The shoreline was still visible on the horizon. We were only just approaching the outer bay. That can't be our source. But a second echo pulse sounded, followed shortly by a third. "I'm switching to the camera," the captain advised, crinkling his brow. We gathered round the monitor, tracking the roving eye of the sub-oceanic camera suspended from the trawler. The feed was indistinct and grainy at this depth, but a dark elliptical blotch on the seabed was clearly evident in the pixelated images. Judging size and distance, the shape measured over 60 meters in length. "I knew it," John crowed, tapping the monitor screen. "A garbage patch." John was almost giddy as he began suiting up and adjusting the settings on his camera. "This is huge," he kept saying. "That much debris less than 100 meters down? It's criminal. Someone's been dumping it here right under our noses." Someone, in John's parlance, meant conglomerate. It meant industry and corporate America. We had just stumbled across traces of a significant ecological infringement, and John was here to expose it. "Think it's the same site?" I offered. The report we were investigating had been located much further offshore. I was trying to ground John, to make him understand we weren't investigative journalists of the EPA. But my remarks backfired. 2 potential sites meant more refuse. It meant a conspiracy and an even greater reckoning, according to John's logic. He didn't need to say any of this. I could read it in the dawning realization of a smile spreading across his lips. It's difficult to describe the darkness you encounter as you descend the depths. The color changes from turquoise to cyan to navy so quickly. A few meters down, everything becomes lined in washed out ribbons of daylight, until you suddenly realize there's more dark than light, and the beam of your torch has substituted the sun. It's just you suspended in all that vastness, surrounded by eerie blue twilight and the sound of your own breathing. John took the lead, hastily descending down the dive line. I tugged on the cord a few times, hoping to slow his progress. I was being overprecautious, since John was an experienced technical diver. Still, every time I looked down to see the line dissolving into black nothingness, a shiver gripped me. I should have been able to see him, or at least the glow of his torch. I was surprised to find that my own torch beam only penetrated a few feet in front of me. It was like swimming in ink. The descent should have taken no more than 10 minutes, but it felt infinitely longer. I checked my gas levels to ensure we were on schedule. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. It was only when John yanked my calf and pointed down that I realized we had nearly reached the bed. The range of our torches was still limited and refused to cut through the twilight. A few schools of fish flickered past, but aside from that, nothing moved. Everything felt dead and still. As we proceeded along the seabed, I began to notice the contours of something large and towering in the distance. The fact that I could see anything at all struck me, since moments earlier, the water had almost been pitch black. A soft, radiant glow now permeated the void. I wasn't sure how to account for it. I had seen this type of low-level incandescence before in certain bioluminescent fish, but to my knowledge, no such species inhabited the bay waters. John pointed to the shadowy outline ahead and moved to detach the camera from his belt. It took a second, but in the watery light, I realized that what we were looking at wasn't debris or even man-made. Stretching out before us was a vertebrae column flanked by protruding bones and strips of moldy flesh. I knew it was impossible. How had a whale carcass ended up here in such shallow waters? More astonishing, the upper half of the animal looked well preserved. The thick gullet and head were intact, showing little signs of decomposition. I stared at the creature in amazement, knowing I was seeing something that could not be. I raised a hand to signal to John, and realized he was already ahead of me, camera lifted to his mask. He ascended toward the open cavity where the whale's underbelly had once been, weaving between the bones. I watched the light of his torch dim and then slowly fade as he disappeared over the splayed carcass. Following his path, I drew closer, the whale fall coming into sharper focus with each thrust of my body through the water. Something was moving inside the stomach cavity. I kicked off the seabed and ascended to get a better look, my flippers sending up a plume of sediment. Angling my gaze downward, I found a heaving mass of octopuses and fish slithering over the remains. There must have been hundreds of them, thrashing and moiling about in a frenzy. They were feeding on the corpse, coiling over one another in a jumble of tentacles and fins. It was both incredible and gruesome at the same time. I had seen John scaling the cavity, but I couldn't spot him anywhere now. Had he fallen in? Were the animals attacking him? I checked my gas levels, noting we had enough oxygen for another 30 minutes before we would have to start the lengthier process of resurfacing. I was about to descend for a closer look when I noticed the inner lining of the stomach cavity. At the mouth of the hollow where bone met tissue, a cluster of bulbous growths padded the cavity wall. The tumescent formations knotted together in a kind of tapestry, combining with the mottled flesh. Moving closer, I passed my torch beam over the surface and flinched. Embedded in the necrotic blubber was a human hand, a sliver of a calf, a single flaccid breast. Every inch of the cavity was covered in bodies, twisted, merging together. I moved from one to the next, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Malformed faces and limbs bent at odd angles, bulging abdomens sculpted from limpid skin, a bas-relief of horrors. As my torch played along the wall, I froze. The body before me was pinned to the wall, arms spread wide. I trailed the beam of light along the hand and forearm, pausing on the small star-shaped tattoo stenciled on the forearm. In the cerulean darkness, the face looked pale and withered, the hairs of its beard bobbing gently in the current. It couldn't have been John, who just minutes before I had watched disappear over the whale corpse. Yet the face in front of me was so uncanny, so familiar. I leaned in, trying to get a closer look, to convince myself I was mistaken. And as I did, the eyes blinked open, revealing two translucent membranes. I recoiled, inhaling a blast of oxygen. A burning sensation spread through my lungs. John's mouth yawned open, emitting a long, plangent cry that echoed through the cavity. I recognized the sound. The low, resonant melody of a whale song is one of the most distinctive noises imaginable. I bit down on my mouthpiece, wanting to scream. Sound travels faster in water, I recall a schoolteacher once telling me. But in the ocean, does it really matter? Is there anyone to hear you screaming? Is there anything that understands what a scream signifies? When the call came in, they were skeptical. Something about a diver in shock and a missing dive partner. The other details got lost in the report. Deliria resulting from decompression sickness was the official explanation given by the doctors. The Coast Guard carried out a rescue search for over a week, but they never managed to locate the whale fall or John. Within 24 hours, John was listed as a missing diver. This term never felt accurate to me. Missing implies the possibility of being found. But I know the ocean took him. And what it takes, it never returns. I like to think he left it all behind and found that purer place he envisioned. Some days, I believe it. Others, I'm not so certain. I once thought I knew the ocean. I no longer believe I do. I haven't been back in the water, and nobody asks questions. If they did, I'm not sure what I'd say. I scroll social media sometimes and look at the pictures posted by friends, most of whom are also marine biologists or nautical enthusiasts. I see the images of colorful fish and blue water, of families swimming with sea turtles on Hawaiian vacations, and I cringe. I can't bring myself to click the heart emoji or post some anodyne comment as etiquette typically dictates. What I want to tell them wouldn't make sense. The ocean didn't want me, and it doesn't want you.